The Talk Shop.
And for the Talk Shop, I'm Nancy Richards, in for Masashama Ndolo this evening. And it's my good fortune, because we are having the most interesting conversation here at the University of the Western Cape, here on the Talk Shop, where we're broadcasting live from the National Research Foundation Science for Society lecture at the Life Sciences building. The Science for Society lecture today is entitled Human Development, Individual and Society. And if you just joined us, well, I'm sorry for you, because you've missed some very interesting presentations. Firstly, from Dr. Chris Desmond. He's an economist, chief research specialist in the Human and Social Development Research Program at HSRC. And he's given us the societal overview, the bigger picture in terms of development. And Dr. Linda Richter, who is director of the DST NRF Centre of Excellence in Human Development at the University of the Witwatersrand, who's given us very much the individual approach. And if you'd like to give us a call with your thoughts on what you've heard, you are so welcome. 0891 104 207 is a number to call us on, or you equally can pop us an SMS. It's 34701, 34701. Don't forget, audience, we're looking forward to hearing what your thoughts have been as well. So put your hand up and we'll make sure that the microphone gets to you. But before we do any of that, our guests right here, lovely to have you both right here where I can ask you questions directly. And I think I'm going to start with a question that applies to both of you. From what I understand, you've actually been working together for many years, 12 years, I think you were saying there, Linda. Do you work hand in hand? It feels so much as if what you have to say, you both need to be listening to one another. Have you worked on what we've heard together or individually? Chris?
Yeah, Linda and I have been working together for some 12 years now. And much of the thinking that we have comes from continual discussions, and what we've been trying to do often is bring insights from different points of view. So myself, I'm coming from an economics point of view, Linda from a child development point of view, and that's really the key. And I think where the centres of excellence are trying to build on that element, where you bring together different disciplines, different approaches, and you allow the time and space for the conversations to try and develop something new at that boundary between disciplines, where you can really get the insights. Because the problems around development, the macro level, they're really based on micro level foundations, on individual children, on families, on what happens to them. And to understand the problems at that level and understand the solutions is not something that you can do with one discipline. It requires people from a multitude of different backgrounds. And what we've been working towards over the years is bringing in others, working together and trying to bring those multiple perspectives to deal with what is an incredibly complex problem, but one that is so key to social development.
Complex problem. I notice you make it a singular. I'm thinking, how many problems are there in attendance? The other thing about listening to what you both had to say, Chris, I had the feeling that the big picture is sort of largely academic. Forgive me, it's something that's going on over there. Whereas, Linda, what you're talking about is something that we can very much lay our hands on. From that point of view, it feels a little bit more hopeful, if you know what I mean. Does it feel like that to you? Do you feel like, the solution actually, although, Chris, you were saying, it's very much about our choice and we need to take responsibility. When it comes down to the individual, you feel actually you can do something.
Well, I think it's the individual perspective is so familiar to us, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to put the science behind the familiarity, is to say to people, these are not just things we know because we're parents or we're members of society, but because there's very deep scientific inquiry behind this. But I think when you take the two things together, what you realize is that we require, because we have other colleagues in this group who are physiologists and geneticists and working with the basic scientists and ecologists, is that to understand any human problem. So one of our themes in our Centre of Excellence is trying to get to grips and understand better violence in South African society. I mean, South African society is an incredibly violent society. Not only acts of physical violence against each other, but kind of so many experiences and examples of hardened attitudes to each other. I mean, kind of racism and deeply ingrained attitudes to women or people who are different. And now, to understand that literally takes an understanding from this macro perspective all the way down to something like these mirror neurons that I was talking about. Because this mirroring capacity, and it's made live by the interaction with an empathic and caring and loving mother, is actually necessary to have the kind of empathy that allows you to confront another person face to face and to see them as you are. But you can't, none of this is one thing. You can't come at it here, there, or you actually need this perspective. But you can't do it all at once. Sometimes the disciplines have to work intensively and deeply in each of their areas, but there has to be opportunity for the conversation between all of you on the topic regularly to deepen understanding.
Yes, absolutely. We still need to talk about these things more and put them out instead of being afraid of them. And violence, interesting that you mentioned violence. It's a word that I wrote down a number of times. And it seems, violence is sort of, it's almost crippling our own development. It's almost just it's not almost, it is physically holding us back. Development, Chris, it's, that your very first question is, what is human development? And you made a point there that it's almost become an overworked word, where it's a little bit like entrepreneur and all those other words, sustainability that we hear so often, and we also think, yes, glaze. What does development really mean? Can we go back to the essence of development as you see it? Can you just give us your take on it?
At the core of it all, what I'm stressing is the element of choice. So often, development is one of those words. It's a nice, positive word. So, no one's going to say if you are pro-development. That sounds good, and so you can be pro-development and pro all sorts of different things. So development is used to say we want the economy to grow, that's development. We want technological advancements, that's development. We want more of this, that's development. But, when it's such an overused word, you lose sight of what it really means. And what I'm trying to emphasize really is that we have to bring it back to what is it that we really want. And what we really want is for people to be able to choose the lives that they want to live. So many people in South Africa, whether it's because of poverty, whether it's because of violence, whether it's because of racism, or sexism, are constrained from living the lives that they want to lead. And so if we see the freedom to choose the life you want to live as development, then we have to prioritize interventions and responses that remove those hindrances to choice. So just earlier when you were, putting the macro in some ways against the micro, if really they're the same thing. They're saying if you have this understanding of development as creating an environment for people to live their lives out as they see fit, then you have to protect the potential of those people, the abilities of those people. And where does that start? That starts in early childhood. And that's why the two connect actually for me seamlessly, that we have to then prioritize. We have direct implications of a concept of development which is about choice. And one of the direct implications is we have to prioritize the care and support of young children and the families.
Choice, it's a wonderful word. It's an open word. It suggests freedom, as you pointed out, but people don't always make good choices. I mean, choice is not necessarily something that's going to lead to the right outcome. A lot of our societal ills are based on bad choices. Which brings me to the point of it's all about whose interpretation are we talking about here. I think one of the points you raised during your presentation was, we have a choice to decide who's going to govern us, who our leaders are going to be. We have that choice. Sometimes we make good choices, sometimes we make bad choices. Where are we going wrong with our choices? And who's to say what's right and wrong? It gets broader and broader and broader, doesn't it? How do we know what good development is?
Well, firstly, there was the constraints that I say. We have to always say that, while choice is important, so is our responsibility to each other and a responsibility to future generations. But at the same time, then we can add layers to that. Poor choices don't come from nowhere. Poor choices typically come from poor environments. So, this always brings us back to the wise words that Steve Biko was saying way back when. It's that, people are shaped by the environment that they're in. And so, again, if we want to emphasize choice, we have to also emphasize an environment which promotes good choice. And that, again, I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but that again brings us back to the importance of childhood in laying the foundations for those choices that are made.
I think Chris also thought that, choice is not something a given at a particular time. At any one time, one is not always totally in possession of all the capacities, of all the knowledge. So choice is an ongoing dilemma for all of us as human beings and as groups. It's not just something given. If properly prepared, we're like choiceful, and then we can. It is a problematical thing. It is something that is dynamic and ongoing for us all.
Dr. Linda Richter, we're talking here at the University of the Western Cape. We're talking about the human development, individual and society, and I'm sure you've got thoughts about development, what it means to you, and what your choice is in respect of development. If you'd like to give us a call, the number is 089 104 102 107, 089 104 to 107, or pop us an SMS on 34701. Stay tuned.
The Talk Shop.
Talk Shop, where we are indeed having a very fascinating conversation all about human development, individual and society. SMS is coming in thick and fast, lovely, and if you'd like to pop us one, 34701, 34701 is the SMS number. If you'd like to call, 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207. We do have a caller on the line, Terry Ann, and then we're going to take Professor O'Connell. Terry Ann, are you with us from...
Yes, that's right. Good evening to you.
Hi, Terry.
And my question is, if a child is not loved and not appreciated by parents, maybe your guest speaker has already covered this, but my reception was rather poor. But anyway, how does it affect the child socially and emotionally throughout their life, not just in the immediate effect, but throughout their life?
Yes, thanks, Ariane. Jolly good question. Right. Linda, I think that you did touch on that. Just expand for us.
Well, unfortunately, we have some very powerful real-life experiments in this. In Eastern Europe, there was, of course, a political policy decision to increase fertility rate, and parents were encouraged to have children, and many of those parents couldn't cope with those children, and there was a massive institutionalization of children. And these children have been studied over the years, children who were put into state orphanages and followed up over many years, and including when it was realized how damaging this was, looking at children who were fostered out into proper families during various stages of their development. And we have very graphic MRI scans of the brains of children who have been reared like this, and it shows real damage, structural and functional damage to the brain. These children often engage in highly repetitive behaviors that mimic some autistic features. They also show what is called a reactive attachment disorder. So if people visit them, they will rush to any stranger to cling to them. And yet, if this person were to pick them up and carry them round, it's almost as if they don't know how to follow up on that relationship. So it is a very tragic and an irreparable situation if children are reared in these conditions. However, because of the fostering programs that were introduced, we now know that children who are fostered early, within the first 2 years of life, and are given the opportunity in this window where the brain is very rapidly developing, where the child's emotional and stress systems are rapidly developing, they can recover almost totally. But it has to happen in this very sensitive period. If it goes beyond that, recovery is extremely difficult, as has been shown by children who've been adopted from Eastern Europe into various Western countries. The difficulties, the adjustment difficulties, the cognitive difficulties of those children are very great. I mean, they can be given a much better quality of life with people who care and try very hard, but the damage has been done, unfortunately. It is just part of being human. And, you know, many parents today think they can replace, there's a cell phone advert that I dislike intensely, as if a cell phone could replace a human being. That cannot happen. The human baby, I think the point of the science over the last 40 years has shown us one thing. The human baby needs a human companion who is caring and loving and interested. And there isn't a substitute for that.
Yeah. I hate to ask you what the tipping point is, you know, say early intervention, early fostering, and, you know, there's obviously a point where it's not going to work so easily, which sort of QED is going to mean years of therapy as an adult, which is, you know, we have a generation of unhappy adults.
You know, Nancy, we don't like to accept it. It goes against the kind of positive intervention culture that we have, that everything can be fixed. So we don't like to accept that. But for most children, and in fact there is plasticity beyond, And when children's environments change dramatically, they can recover in many ways. But for most children who in those circumstances in their early life, they continue to be in those circumstances. It's like children who grow up in poverty and deprivation. They don't get chances after 2 to recover. So the damages that get done early get entrenched by the poor circumstances. So in many ways, and it is now a given opportunity. Science has, with these experiments that I talked about, that looked at early interventions before the age of 2, that can make up all of this deprivation. So simple stimulus programs that just give additional stimulation, guiding a mother, showing her what her baby needs, ensuring children have protein supplements if their diet is poor, can make the difference of 45% earnings as an adult. We can't be ignoring these things.
Yeah, that nutritional statistic was extraordinary. And one is certainly not an advocate of poverty in any shape or form, but being financially poor doesn't necessarily mean you have to be spiritually poor or emotionally poor. So that's something else to think about. Many things to think about. If you'd like to give us a call, 0891 104 207. We've got a couple of hands coming up here. I'm going to start with Professor Brian O'Connell, who's actually the rector of the University of Western Cape. Lovely to have you with us. Thank you very much. And your comments, please.
This is fascinating. John Goodlad is an educationist in the United States of America. And speaking about the development of schools and schooling, he argued that the largest unit of change in any project that is looking to repair damage is the school, not the city, not the district, but the school with its own idiosyncrasies and its own history. How would we tackle this problem on the Cape Flats, for instance? Where would our point of entry be with respect to the ways in which we engage to counteract the damage that has been done and make people whole? How do you see the unit of change that could be manageable?
Brian, can I throw that back at you? You are an educationalist. I'm not. I would give a very inadequate reply in comparison to yours. Could we ask you, given your deep history in this discipline, what are your thoughts?
Well, I believe that if we don't reconstruct family and community, we're going to have a very, very difficult time ahead. And we've got about 5 or 10 years to do this. And so we need a kind of leadership that gives the imprimatur, that says, do this. We in Struggle had a cohorts of community organizations which were really, really sharp and very smart and did incredible things very, very quickly. I was chair of one of them, and we could get people out of jail within 5 minutes by getting money from a supermarket in Grassy Park and get the money to the Weinberg. It was that kind of. But all of that disappeared from 1994, largely because the people now in power were the people who had been elected. And so the argument was, why do we need authority and inside the community when there are these formally elected bodies to do that? We were ready for this new for the transition. We were ready for the new revolution. And somehow or other that was aborted. And so the ways back, I believe, are that we must now go back into our communities and we must tell the truth about what the reality in South Africa is. Because as long as South Africans believe that it's possible for government to deal with all of their needs, so long will they be beggars. And so, in a sense, the Bill of Rights has also, for me, been something that is great, but also has done something that I think unfortunate. Because it has given every person the right to believe that the state owes them. And so the energy inside the community is used in mobilizing against the state, rather than mobilizing in developing the competences within the community to do as much as they possibly can on their own, like the Amartya Sen stuff, and then ask the government to be their partner with respect to the things they cannot do. But now we're all waiting for government to come, and it's not going to come. And that's the big disaster. The other difficulty I have also is, of course, with the notion of socialism. No, not that I'm not prepared to be a socialist tomorrow. I am, if that's going to make the difference. But because it's there and owned by so many people, the idea is out there that all you've got to do is to declare it. And that ends the story. And then tomorrow South Africa changes because you've declared it. The work that's got to be done is exactly the same no matter what economic system you choose. So these are the truths that people must get to know and accept. And this then makes it possible for people for the entry into those spaces. And the discourse about how do we actually go about taking ownership of our own space, committing to our own space, and developing the competences we need in order to develop that space with the help of government or donors. And that's a big shift.
I'm sure Chris wants to say something, but one of the things that strikes me is, I followed this cohort of children from before birth who are now 24 years old. And one of the things we've done is we're studying their transition to adulthood. And it's made me think about that part of development that I hadn't been thinking of before, but I've sort of grown up intellectually with this cohort. And what you talk about speaking honestly, and it's not something that is happening. For example, just like the rest of South Africa, about half of these young people have not finished their schooling. Now, to have a society telling them that jobs will be created is not truthful, because for those people, there's no country in the world where jobs will be created for people without now basic secondary education. And we're not having the discussion that allows people to think, to know that, and take choices about how they will live a life further from that point. But I don't know, Chris, you might.
I do feel and thank you so much, Professor. It was spoken like a true educationalist, but it was really interesting to hear that. And Chris, coming back to some of the things that you were saying about big dreaming, and your whole presentation, where does education come into that? Because the things that you highlight were big dreams, responsibility, choice. It feels just as mothers have, carry the development in their hands, so do teachers, who are sort of massively underrated, I can say. Where does education come into your thoughts about development?
It comes in a number of different ways, positive and negative. I mean, so education is clearly at the heart of many of the free choices that we want to see. Without education, you don't have the choice, as Linda was saying, to go on to get the right sort of jobs. You don't have the choice to go on to join institutions of higher learning. You've taken away that choice by poor education. And you don't have the choice to participate in the society in the way in which you would like. So that's, education is at the heart of it all. And so, the good teachers that are out there, and we have many good teachers, are extremely undervalued. These are the people who are building the next generation and can change futures for many children. But then there are also a lot of bad teachers. There are teachers who are not doing well. And then that's not only denying children the value of their education, the opportunities that education affords, it's also telling them that they are not worth it. That they are not worth being taught properly, that they are not worth the teacher coming to school every day, that they are not worth the school being maintained properly. And so they get denied twice. They get denied their education, and they get denied the right to the respect that they deserve as people. And to bring back to the professor's point is that, these changes at the community level are what are key. This is what we should be debating. We should be having these discussions at the national level and in every forum we can. How can we help the family? How can we help communities? How can we activate people to take on the developmental challenges? We all know what the rand-dollar exchange rate is. It comes on the news every day. Does it actually make any meaningful difference to anyone's day-to-day life what the rand-dollar exchange rate is? So we're discussing development as if it's only this macroeconomic picture. Where are the discussions of how we go into communities which are hurting, and how can we support those communities to take ownership of those problems and solve them?
Dr. Chris, thank you. Thank you. I've already forgotten your name. Unforgivable. I'm so caught up with what you're saying. Dr. Chris Desmond, thank you very much. You're listening to the Talk Shop here on SAFM. We're talking about human development, individual and society. We've got questions and hands going up all over the place, and we've got lots of SMSs too. So do stay tuned. We'll be right back.
South Africa are in the best position they could want to be before trying to break their drought in ICC global events. The Proteas will be hoping to once again beat Australia and keep their eyes on their goal of retaining their #1 ODI ranking. So be sure not to miss the first and second ODI on the 14th and 16th of November. Catch all the action from the Waka Cricket Ground in Perth from as early as 5:20 on your favorite SABC radio station.
The amazing Specsavers summer promotion is now on. Get a free pair of single vision prescription sunglasses up to the value of 2,100 Rand. That's right, free prescription sunglasses. To get yours, simply purchase an eye test and prescription spectacles. Offer ends 31 January 2015. T's and C's apply. Specsavers, for affordable eye care and a whole lot more.
This October, Classic Feel magazine explores the life and legacy of legendary opera singer Maria Callas. Readers can now access Classic Feel magazine featuring Maria Callas anywhere with a few touches and taps of their iPad screen. To get the app on your iPad, go to the iStore, search for CLASSICFEEL and download the Classic Feel magazine app. Within the app, readers can purchase a range of issues of Classic Feel magazine and indulge in a range of national and international art, culture and lifestyle. Visit classicfeel.co.za for more info.
The Talk Shop.
It is the Talk Shop, broadcasting live from the University of the Western Cape, talking at the National Research Foundation Science for Society lecture at the Life Sciences Building on topic is human development, individual and society. I'm Nancy Richards in for Masa Shaba. And before we take the next couple of questions, we are going to read the SMSs. I think we're going to read the SMSs. And we're going to take another one of the questions. Tandy, our program director, who's been waiting very patiently, Tandy Ngwebi, thank you very much, Executive Director, Research and Chairs at the Centre of Excellence. Lovely to have a question from you, and that would be, or question, comment, tell us.
It's a question, Nancy. Thank you very much. Linda, you got me thinking. In fact, both of you and Chris, when you spoke about development, I studied cell and developmental biology, and I never thought about development in that sense, the sense that you have put forward. And I studied embryonic development, and one of the things, I studied a lot of mice that were sick and they developed a lot of abnormalities. But that mimics what happens in humans. And I know we've got a number of child abnormalities or babies with abnormalities and infants with abnormalities that are born with those abnormalities. So it got me thinking, with your studies, is there any link with the genetic mutations that happen that will lead to those abnormalities? Any link with the factors outside the environment of the baby, like outside utero, that will link to the triggering of those mutations to cause those kind of things? And it just occurred to me, if there is, then what we were talking about earlier at the forum today about science engagement and science communication and empowering communities with the power of science, then there's a very big window of opportunity for people like yourselves and people who have studied, who are still doing the biology and the developmental biology and looking at children's issues, particularly with abnormalities, to have that science and engagement with communities on these issues. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Tandy. Of course, it's hugely relevant. I mean, you would have studied epigenetics and how these external factors would be triggering genetic changes. So even without the passing on of abnormal genes from a parent to child, the infant or the fetus's environment could trigger these major changes. So one of them is the Western Cape has the highest fetal alcohol syndrome prevalence in the world, and that is a clear example of the fetus being exposed to an external agent and causing a structural abnormality, a whole profile of structural abnormalities, including a mental handicap and so on, that will last a lifetime. But many of these are, stress is now thought to cause, really change the autonomic nervous system So mother's circulating stress hormones, her cortisol levels during pregnancy will condition the baby. So this is a hugely adaptive part of human beings. The mother's environment, the fetal environment, is telling the baby what kind of world it's going to grow into. And so that is preparing the fetus. So if the mother is stressed, it's telling the fetus, adapt, get ready to survive another kind of, a different. So it's a highly adaptable mechanism on the part of the baby. But of course, the baby then comes into an environment in which the child needs to get on with other people, not fight and flight and so on, and so there's this incredible misfit. But there's so much we can do to protect pregnancy. We worry a lot about disability in South Africa because although we don't have the precise estimates, we know that our rates of disability in young children are probably higher than some other comparable situations. But we're not consciously trying to prevent disability. The major occurrence of disability occurs in pregnancy and delivery. And if we protected delivery and pregnancy better, we would prevent about 60 to 70% of early childhood disability. So there's an enormous opportunity to realize, but we also need to protect other things. Traditional African child-rearing practices are amongst the most protective in the world, so much so that they're being adopted everywhere in the world as ways of dealing with highly vulnerable children. So traditional African child-rearing practices are things like carrying the baby in an upright position, which keeps the baby alert, but is the tempo of walking, for example, is highly calming, so babies are alert but calm. Responsive feeding the baby on demand, sleeping, co-sleeping with babies. All of these are practices which kangaroo care, which you showed, is now a practice in every high-tech hospital around the world to care for premature babies, vulnerable. We need to protect these practices which have evolved on this continent because they are so protective of very young children. We need to tell parents that it's not a smart thing to be pushing a baby around in a baby chair, because that's what the commercial market has taught you. It's not a smart thing to be bottle feeding. Breastfeeding is just the perfect nutrient for. But where is the voice that tells people authoritatively that these are the best things for you? And so we need to validate our own practices, our own customs that are so protective of young children.
I feel that we're listening to the voice that validates these things, and I'm just thinking perhaps you might just like to write another book on that very topic. You're listening to the Talk Shop here on SAFM. What a fascinating conversation, all about development, human development, individual and societal. There's a gentleman who's been waiting here for a very long time, after which I'm going to read the SMSs. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for your wait. Please identify yourself first.
Jerome Samrat, Senior Director for Community Interaction at Stellenbosch University. The development agendas that Chris has been talking about all seem to presuppose some kind of connectedness, some caring, compassion, solidarity even. So the dream that we have seems to be a common one. And Linda's been speaking about individual development, about the dependency of childhood, early childhood, and the awareness of relationships. For all that talk, somewhere along the line, we get another very dominant narrative that tells us that independence, self-sufficiency is what is important. And the very negative mutations of that, rampant individualism, corruption, and these seem to be destroying our common dream. So for everything that we're doing in the sphere of childhood, there seems to be a narrative that cancels that empathetic, caring, connected way of being. Your thoughts on this?
I'm not sure I'm getting your point, because the caring that, in studying mothers and babies or caregivers and babies together, a caring capacity in a child. I mean, for example, young babies turn to the cries of other babies. That happens in an environment where they experience this experience of empathic care seems to activate these empathic capacities. So I'm not quite sure what you say. I don't believe that this kind of caring is inculcating have I misunderstood you?
Yeah, do you want to just expand a little bit on your point? I'm also not quite sure. Where is this negativity coming from?
Well, I mean, I totally buy into what you're saying in terms of the importance of early childhood and about the emotional attachments that are made, and especially in dependency. But somewhere along the line in our socialization, there are powerful narratives that enter that says to us that independence, self-sufficiency, not the relational way of being, is what we are to strive towards. And only in infancy and in old age are we dependent on other people. You know, I can refer you to Alasdair MacIntyre, dependent rational animals. So most of our lives, we live in a state that says independence, self-sufficiency is what it is about. And I think that may make our common dream kaput.
I guess, Chris, maybe the independent thought, the big dream, perhaps there's something in there for you?
Well, I think you touched on an incredibly important point. That, you know, if you raise these possibilities of this more caring society or this society that promotes, you know, the protection of children and choice, then people will turn around to you and say, no, you know, everyone's out for themselves. We have the evidence of it. We have corruption. We have greed. We have get, and get for yourself. But that's the point that I want to bring us back to. Does it have to be like that? It wasn't always like that. Will it always be like that? And so it is impossible to realize the dreams that we have for development in a society that has that level of greed and corruption. But that's other things being equal. So if we are to achieve the dreams that we want for development, then we have to address these types of things that you raise. How exactly we address them, that's a longer answer and a more complicated one. But you touch on exactly an example of what I was trying to raise, is that there are things which constrain the realization of our dream, and they are major things. And unless we tackle those major things, we're really, you know, fighting a losing battle.
Yes, we can't afford to have our development constrained. Linda, before you respond as well, with another gentleman who's been waiting for some time, just tell us who you are, please.
My name is Kenneth Hammond, and I'm a PhD student at Stellenbosch University. My question goes to Dr. Richter. Thank you for a very wonderful presentation. My question is about, earlier on you showed us how the mother interacts with the baby with cues and all that. Now, I am interested to find out what happens in cases where there's no mother figure. Is that the mother figure you showed a placeholder for a primary caregiver, or it has to be primarily a mother thing? Thank you.
That's an interesting question, and it absorbs a lot of attention of many people. It does seem that the mother, the biological mother, plays a very important part immediately after birth. There are some biological and psychological things that happen. She's prepared herself for 9 months. She too is so utterly focused on the baby. The baby is responding to a human, not necessarily the mother. Although the baby has spent 9 months in the mother's womb, there is a familiarity. We now know that this very rapid fixing on the mother, the smell of her breast milk, the sight of her, the tone of her voice, all of these things have been prepared. But what we do know is that shortly after birth, that position can be taken by anybody. And when I use the word mother, I mean the person who is the intimate, caring, constant figure for the child's life. Apart from this very immediate time after birth, it can be anybody, but it has to be a person who has a future orientation about this child. People who've observed children in institutions, in orphanages, have seen that the interactions are very time-bound. They have to do with push the car, no, come, go to have a meal. That's not how human beings raise children. Human beings raise children thinking about, when my son was little, I used to think, oh my God, he's never going to meet a wife, he's got such bad manners. You're always raising a child into a long horizon. You think and act very differently because this is imbued with future. Now that is the quality of parenting and mothering that I think is critically important for children. I just wanted to reply quickly to Jerome. I think, Jerome, you see instances of human beings trying to break through that all the time. And we're not tasking our institutions to take the opportunities. We've all seen the little child, first year of school, in the school race, who stops in the race midway and waits for their friend to catch up. We see, that springs through. I gave the example this morning that when I was head of Department of Psychology, I surveyed psychology students and asked them why they were doing psychology. They all said, I'd like to know more about myself and I would like to help others. It was that same impulse springing through, but our institutions are no longer responding to that impulse. And it's something we have to grapple with our institutions about.
And grappling with it, we are right here on the talk shop. I have to say there was one line that you said, Linda, something about when babies are born, they just look for love, and wherever they find it, it doesn't really matter as long as they get it, and that sort of kind of stayed with me. You're listening to the talk shop with Gentleman in the Black Hat. We're going to get to you just in a minute, but we've got a few SMSs here. Wonderful talk by both researchers. What commitment? A comment on Linda Richter's talk. The ECD policy in the NDP was in paper only. Nothing has been put into action, unlikely that it would do. About the first 1,000 days, only a handful of people and the director know what the first 1,000 days first 1,000 days means. People on the ground are totally ignorant in the line of duty, know nothing about the policy of 1,000 days. Josephine, perhaps that's something we can get to in a minute. I would like to find out whether stress, which a mind experienced for a long time, can have an irreversible consequences to it. That's from Zikona in East London. I'm sure stress is reversible. One would like to think so. Excellent talk by Linda and Chris. Thank you very much, from Arvind Bana, who says the Centre of Excellence in Human Development will also be looking at the critical development issues confronting adolescence. Understanding the basis on which young people thrive, even in difficult circumstances, is an area of interest and exploratory. Another one says there's a wonderful work being done at the ECD centres in Cape Town by a group called Healthy Start Foundation, yes, Linda knows them, that look at basic hygiene education amongst the poorest of the poor and the youngest and the most frail in our community. Thank you, Gino. And lastly, is enough done to address environmental factors such as heavy metals, toxins, etc., impacting on development? And I have no doubt that that is a story for another day. Finally, government in the education sector are so focused on matriculants and then passing, but are neglecting the foundation phase of the child's education, which is a crucial building block in child development. How do we get government more involved and invest more in the early years of development? Kay from Rustenburg. Absolutely, ECD, yes, Linda's nodding her head, is all. Don't forget that I think that this program probably will be podcast. We're hoping it will be podcast, if anybody would like it, on Monday. So don't expect it immediately, but check our website at a later stage, www.safm.co.za. Look for talk shop of today's date. And hopefully your presentations will perhaps be online. You can give us those details in a minute. Gentleman in the black hat, thank you for your patience. And you are whom with your question?
My name is Kevin Andrews and I'm a student of the University of Western Cape. I'm doing my second year now. Just like to thank the panel for enlightening us this afternoon. But there's a statement that I'd like to highlight. This poor environment equals poor choices. So now, just to respond to what Dr. Chris Desmond said earlier about, and I quote, fabulous grants. I would like to question, is this a fair analysis? And are we saying that they are so fabulous as, like, have we ever benefited from them personally for us to sit and be able to say that? Have we been in a situation where we can imagine ourselves growing up in a household with a monthly income of only 300 Rand, and because that's basically what the grant is, the government grant in South Africa currently is. And to relate this to the broader topic, how are we as a society agreeing to this and allowing this to happen? And are we saying this is fine to sustain a family? Are we then not stifling human development? That's my question.
That's a great question. And so, starting with poor environment. Firstly, we should make something very clear. Poor environment leading to poor decisions. Many people are very resilient to their environment, and so many people live through incredibly difficult environments and make very good choices. But it's harder for people to make those good choices under difficult environments. So that's all I'm saying. I don't want to make it sound like it's an inevitable consequence of a difficult environment. That would do an injustice to all the resilience that so many people have shown. In terms of the grants, when I say that the grants are fabulous, what we see at a national level is we see that the grants have done a huge amount to alleviate absolute poverty. So the really extreme end of poverty, where people have absolutely nothing. It's done a great job in reducing the number of people and number of families living in those conditions. It hasn't done enough to lift people out of poverty altogether. But that's not good, and that's not good enough. We don't want people left in poverty. It's a fantastic thing that people are no longer living in the most extreme forms of poverty because of those grants. But we shouldn't overstretch what we think the grants can do. The grants are there to support children, people with disabilities, and pensioners, primarily. But what happens is they end up being support to the entire family. And the reason they become support to the entire family is that we have an absolutely enormous rate of unemployment. So the grants have done a good job at what they are supposed to do, which is to provide additional support for people who have children and pensioners in the household. That's a good job. But they cannot lift everyone out of poverty. For that requires employment. And so we mustn't conflate perhaps the task. So I don't want to suggest that a few £100 a month is enough for a family to live on. That's absolutely not the case. It's a helping support to at least lift people out of extreme poverty. If we're going to resolve the developmental question, we have to resolve the employment question. Because that's the only way that families can get the income necessary to live much fuller lives. Grants will never do that.
If we're going to solve the development problem, again, it comes back to the singular problem, and there are so many multifaceted problems, and I wonder to what extent money will ever solve the problems. Isn't it mindset that we need to be shifting here?
So this is the aphorism that the wealthy of the world think that love is the most important thing. The poor know that it is money. So there are I was emphasizing that it's more than money, but I think in a country like ours that has inequality like ours, to have, as the question was put, to have people having to find a way to live as a family off a few £100, while others can waste money on a second car being a Ferrari, is just unacceptable. And so, when I say the problem, I do mean the problem. The problem is that we don't value people as people in this country. We want to go chasing after income, we want to go chasing after all sorts of other prestigious things. If we took the decision as the country to prioritize people, to prioritize human development, not just some narrow definition of economic development, that will solve the problem. It is one problem. It's what we as society value. We value our citizens. We will find a way to fix all the problems, the multiple. But we have to make that choice to value it as a society, as a single problem.
Well, certainly we do have to prioritise human development. And I think bringing your two conversations together, I can't help feeling, I know somebody said that, you have to look at, a society reflects, the way you bring up your children is the sort of how your society is reflected. And if you're bringing up your children badly, that's going to reflect on your society. Which brings the two of you together. I mean, Linda, what you're saying is that we need to emphasize more how early childhood development, how as individuals we need to look after our children, which will then impact on a healthier society. So how do we take this forward?
Well, I just want to respond to the SMS about nothing has been done about early child development policy. Our team, including Chris and myself and other people in our group, have been working with government, with non-governmental organizations, civil society, for about the last 5 years, and with other experts in all over the world, trying to help, and work with government. We did the diagnostic review, the Early Child Development Diagnostic Review, and then we were commissioned by the Department of Social Development and UNICEF to write the first draft of the Early Child Development Policy and Program. And there is an enormous sense that this is important. But there's another kind of science to the science that we've been talking about here. We've been talking about discovery science, knowing, these scientific truths about how things. It's implementation science. We know that we should be doing, for example, grade R was quite extraordinarily well implemented at scale in 10 years. As I said, not many people know it is the only fully government-funded preschool program in a lower middle-income country. It did that on the back of an existing system, so the implementation challenges were great, but they were not as great. Some of the pieces of early child development support can be built onto the health system, but once children are a year to 18 months old, they start losing contact with the health system. They're only in communities. And as you were saying, several people have said, you have to build community structures. That's another kind of implementation science. And we have got to get serious in South Africa about implementation science. It's something that people all over the world are talking about. It's learning different kinds of principles. It's the principles of how you do things. And, we really, this is our, for me at least, as an early child development person, is like the next big challenge is, how do you get this done?
We're going to hold that thought, and we've got another big question that's come in. Population control policies, could they aid towards us seeing the results of development efforts? Definitely a topic for another day, but right now you're listening to the Talk Shop. Stay with us. Well, this has been the Talk Shop here on SFM. Sadly, we are completely out of time, which is such a pity. We've got another hand going up. But thank you very much. And a very, very big thank you to our guests, Dr. Chris Desmond and Dr. Linda Richter. I say that our guests, actually, they've been the guests right here of the conversation, which is the National Research Foundation Science for Society lecture at the Life Sciences Building. Human development and individual society is what we've been talking about. It's been fascinating. Hopefully it will be podcast around about Monday on safm.co.za, also on nrf.ac.za. And thank you very much to you all for listening. Thank you so much. It's been totally fascinating. Thanks to the team. That's Lesego Manganyane, Albert Clarkson here in Cape Town, Samkelo Mdlele, Solofelo Pelo in Johannesburg, and Patrick Monana. And I've been Nancy Richards in for Masashaba Ndolo.